All right, we are recording. This is like 37, episode 37. We're just this with Richard Rohr. And if you are watching and watching our archives and you want to join us live, we would love to have you. All the information that you'll need is in the comments section. So just take a look down there, and we hope that you can join us sometime and actually join into the conversation. All right, we're going to be starting on page 56, The Great River. 56, the Great River. We are in chapter 2, just kind of getting the lay of the land. This is all about just Richard Rohr's sort of random thoughts. I mean, they're loosely collected, right? But they're kind of in no particular order. It's kind of interesting the way this book is organized. I mean, there is a flow to it, of course, about contemplative practice and contemplative experience. And the first chapter was really about what what is contemplation? What is it all about? And the second chapter has been more about the how, in terms of how we go about it, not specifically, more generally, but you can kind of see the shift in perspective into chapter 2. So last week we talked about the riverbed of mercy, and now we're going to talk about the great river itself. Before we dive into that, was there anything left over from last week that anybody felt was underdeveloped and would like to kick around a little bit? Any old business? All righty then, here we go. 56, the Great River. You are much larger than the good or bad stories you tell about yourself. Those stories are never the whole you, nor the great you, never the great river, nor are they places where a bigger life can happen. No wonder the Spirit is described as flowing water, as a spring inside you, and as a river of life. Your life is really not about you. You are part of a much larger dynamic flow called life itself, or simply God. Faith does not need to push the river precisely because it is able to trust that there is a river, and you are already in it. The river is God's infinite love. Without some awareness of being supported by and part of this always flowing river, you will succumb to your ego's preoccupations and fears. To be held by God means that you have to let go of your small boundaries, at least to some degree. Frankly, you have to be able to be shared, to sit at the group table instead of sitting alone and apart. The ego initially does not like that, even though it will be the source of its deepest happiness and contentment. This invitation should be a huge burden off your shoulders. Now you do not need to be privately correct. You just need to stay connected. Okay. Initial thoughts, takeaways, standouts?
So if the river flows through me and there's rocks, the water flowing smooths my rocks too along the way, right?
Wait, say that again, Ellen?
So as the river flows through and I have rocks, as the water flows through, it smooths my rocks along the way. That's the metaphor I see now.
What about those rocks? What are you seeing about those rocks?
They're rough, but they're, gravelly. And then they become smoother. And then when it gets to the delta, it becomes sand.
Oh, are you the rock?
Yes.
Okay. I'm catching your metaphor now.
Okay.
I'm catching your drift.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, he doesn't talk about rocks, but we can put rocks in the river. Hey, it's our metaphor. We can do whatever we want with it. Anything else? All right, well, let's dig in. See what kind of trouble we can get into here. You are much larger than the good or bad stories you tell about yourself. You are much larger than the good or bad stories you tell about yourself. Okay, the good or bad stories. Have you ever heard of a self-narrative? Is that a phrase you've heard before? Okay, yeah, I see a lot of heads. So this self-narrative is a story that we tell about ourselves. This self-narrative is the way that we see ourselves egoically. The self-narrative is what we've built up over all the experience of our lifetime to date, starting with earliest childhood in that formative time when our needs are either being met or they're not being met. And we are then putting in place those programs for happiness because our basic human drives, those three basic human drives, are not being met. You know, as Thomas Keating puts them out, it's safety and security, it's affection and esteem and power and control. Those three centers of human needs and compulsive drives. Same three that Jesus put down in the wilderness, right? Relevance, power, and attention, or spectacular attention. So those three kind of symbolize the whole need of us as individual human beings. And either those needs are met in our childhood or they're not. And you look back on your own childhood and you can kind of recreate, you know, how dysfunctional was your family? I mean, every family is dysfunctional, but how dysfunctional was it? Was it dysfunctional to the point of being traumatic? You know, were there huge things that happened? Was there an alcoholic or an addict in one of the parents or in the family that just created that whole dynamic? Was there mental illness? Was there illness, period? You know, or was it pretty garden variety? No matter where our childhood lands on that total spectrum of human possibility, we're all recovering from something. You know, needs are never going to be met. They can't be, and they're not supposed to be. And so we as children then find ways to cope, and that begins the process of the self-narrative, starting down in the unconscious, the programs we put in place for happiness and survival, and then all of the experiences since. So what is that self-narrative about ourselves? Do we see ourselves as basically a competent person, a lovable person, a person who's worthy of connection and affection? Or do we see the exact opposite of that? Are we left always with the narrative that we have to prove ourselves, that nobody is going to see us as adequate or anything else? But that self-narrative, that story that we tell ourselves, whatever it happens to be, who we see ourselves in our mind's eye, he's saying is much smaller than the totality of who we are. It's just a story. It actually is not you at all. It's just a story that you tell yourself, that your mind is telling you, actually. And our whole goal here in the spiritual process, our whole goal on Jesus' way, and our whole goal in contemplative practice is to be able to get free from that story, to be able to step outside and see the truth that will make us free from the fear of the egoic mind who's just trying to survive. And so that's really what we're doing in a nutshell, right? And it requires the descent we're always talking about. It requires the stripping away over time. But we're trying to get free of that story we tell ourselves. We're trying to get free of the self-narrative and see the larger picture, be able to get a sense of a deeper self that is much larger than the stories we tell ourselves. So that egoic self, that's sometimes called the false self or the small self, is the story that we tell ourselves, that egoic consciousness. The great you that he's talking about would be the true self or the watcher. You know, different traditions have different names for it. So he says those stories that you tell yourself are never the whole you, that egoic or false self, nor the great you, not the great you, never the great river, nor are they places where a bigger life can actually happen. Jesus is trying to get us to that place of truth that makes us free, that transcends both what we can think about, what we imagine, the illusions that we hold, the beliefs that we hold, and then also just the physical world around us, everything that we can see and taste and smell and measure with our instruments. We're trying to get to a place where we can transcend that and see at the same time the connection that underlies all of that. No wonder the Spirit is described as flowing water. And the citation there is John 7, as a spring inside you, John 4, and as a river of life, Ezekiel 47, Revelation 22. So all those metaphors that Jesus uses are trying to get this across to us. You know, there is that constant movement, that flowing of spirit as if flowing of water, always in motion. And we're either part of the motion or we're not. But here's where it starts to get interesting. Your life is really not about you. You are a part of a much larger dynamic flow called life itself, or simply God. Now, when you hear that, your life is really not about you. You're part of a much larger dynamic flow called God. How's that landing on you? What is it calling up? Any images, any thoughts? Is it comfortable? Is it uncomfortable?
And we're back to the discussion with who's pulling the puppet strings.
Okay.
Do we have free will, or are we part of a bigger life that God has for us already designed? I don't know.
You know, I really hadn't thought about it in terms of free will. How do you see, how does the free will fit in it to that for you, Kathy?
Well, it just says your life is not really about you. I guess I was reading into that maybe we don't have the choices, but we probably still do have choices.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Okay.
Well, what I'm hearing here is life is not about you. Life is not about my self-concept. So referencing Keating's programs from happiness, okay? My idealized self of, who I should be and how I'm observing myself being less than that person, and that gap being shame and all that kind of stuff. Again, all the self-narrative, all this kind of stuff, all this thinking that I'm creating of Randy and Randy's relationship with life and stuff. It's not really, again, if I'm hearing Rohr correctly, all that stuff is just, I don't know, to get kind of Buddhist about it and stuff. It's just an illusion. It's just kind of a dream. It's not the real deal.
Mm-hmm.
And I like, it's kind of relieving too when he says like you'll never the stories are never the whole you, not the great you. So it's not like the ego. It was interesting to observe my mind when I was reading like, well, what is the real me, and will I ever really know the whole me? And then it, it was really relieving, just kind of that sense of I don't have to know, like it doesn't matter, that's the whole point, is it doesn't matter. Like any kind of narrative that I could ever possibly come up with about the I is contradictory to the whole point,
Yeah.
It's relieving because it's like, yeah, any kind of narrative that we can create, any kind of fear, struggle, or like we're not alone. We're all part of something bigger and better.
How do you know if the you that you think is you is the real you?
I've wondered all my life,
What's
like
that?
it could be a figment of your imagination, or you could all be a figment of my imagination, and we don't really know like the being of beingness of things, or really, but it doesn't matter. I think that's what he's saying, is it doesn't matter.
Oh, I think it matters in terms of us knowing who the real self is, who we really are. I think that matters. But the question is, how do you know? How do you know that the you that you think is you is really you? I mean, is there a way? William was laughing. You got a thought there, William?
One of my clients said this to me today. He said, when I say I am breathing, like that's an egoic thing. But when I stop thinking about my breathing, the me that continues breathing is the real me.
Oh, wait, say that again. I think there might have been something profound in there, but say it again.
The idea that when I say I am breathing, like
Yeah.
that's egoic thing. But then when we stop thinking about our breathing, we continue to breathe. So that part of me that keeps breathing when I'm not thinking about my breathing, like that's the real me.
I like that. That's pretty cool. I mean, it's analogy that probably doesn't quite totally
Yeah.
hold up, but it's in the right direction. That's very cool.
Well, in that, if I can take a handoff and go there, is again, I can observe my thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, I am not my thinking.
Mm.
Does that, again, this is just me.
Oh, you and Descartes are going to have to duke it out in the parking lot, man.
But again, if I have a self-concept and I can observe, yeah, Randy thinks he's a 60-year-old man, and all these, I don't know, whatever kind of things that you would use to describe. I'm a husband and all this and that kind of stuff. If I can observe that, then therefore I am not my thoughts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So everything that is that darn self-concept stuff.
Yeah, I think we need to take Descartes and turn him around. I am, therefore I think. It really is the
Well, it is
way
that,
it works.
sure.
But
Yeah.
I
This
think-
is
I
a
think-
jug of wine and a doobie kind of discussion for me.
But I think it's important for us to have a handle on that. How can we start to know? I mean, yes, we're chipping away at it here, but how can we know that the you that we think about, the I that we think about, whether it's really our true self? But that's really important for us to have a handle on that. I think.
I was.
Go ahead. Is that Ellen? Who was starting to talk?
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I was thinking too, when when we formulate our stories, the narrative of ourselves, as a kid growing up, we have personalities we're born with, but it also the story we eventually formulate of ourselves is actually based on the people around us, their opinions of us. So their opinions, you see, and they are the cultural teachings, the society that have told us this is how one should behave. If I have this willful personality, either it will be admired in one culture or it will be tamped down by another culture. So your true self is hidden. Well, when does it come out? I don't know. When the inhibitions are gone. Like okay, I've always wanted to learn how to play an instrument, so I took up the flute, but I didn't have the desire. I didn't like it, and then I see you playing the guitar, so I bought a guitar. So I played it for 2 months, 3 months. The novelty went away. If I really wanted to play it, it's still right here, sitting. If I really wanted to play because I love it and the desire's there, I would have taken it up. So I think my true self is also there, but you experiment, you try things. Then your true desires or true self comes out. And you go, oh, I really didn't want it. I just wanted to look like I wanted to. Same with gardening. I said, oh yeah, I want to do this and garden. And then here comes buying the stuff and go, no, I don't want to get my hands dirty. I don't want to touch that soil. But other people enjoy it. Isn't that my true self?
So how do we know?
I think, Ellen, you're identifying with activity.
Yeah.
Who you are as an activity, which certainly is a common way for people to define themselves. But if I'm hearing the Rohr right, again, with that we are life, it's bigger than an activity. And what I'm trying to close my thoughts here, and I'll shut up, is again, it's who we are is bigger than our identity. So again, whether we can identify with an activity or an attribute, what Rohr is implying here is we're much bigger than any idea that we may have who we are. Butcher, baker, candlestick maker, whatever it may be. Because again, I'm a guy and I identify with my career a lot, it's not, again, it's not who I conceptualize myself as. I am much, much larger than what my mind can conceive.
So we're all kind
Does that
of,
make sense?
absolutely, and we're all driving in the right direction. So let's put a very, very simple rule down, because I think we can make this concrete. The first line of the Tao Te Ching, are you familiar with the Tao Te Ching? It's the seminal writing of the Taoist belief system. It goes this way: the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. Now, Tao means the way, the same way that Jesus speaks of the way. And so this way to, we would say the way back to the Father, the way to kingdom. For the Taoists, it's the way to harmony with everything that is. But the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. It's very simple. Any identity that you can name, any identity that you can put into words is not who you really are. The real true self cannot be named. You can't express it. It's ineffable. The only thing you can do is experience it in real time. But as soon as you put words to it, even if you've had a pure experience of your true self in meditation or just in a very a very sacred moment, as soon as you express it, as soon as you put it into words, you've stepped away from it, and it's no longer that pure self. So that, to me, is the main difference. Anything that we do to conceive of who we are, however we put it into words or just think of it in our minds, that's not who we are. It's too small. It's just a projection. So when we are talking about this greater self, this great river, that's what we experience in real time. And we can be completely convinced and know that we know that that self is real, that self is true, but we can't express it. So if we're getting lost in the world of words, if we're getting lost in these specifics, then we've already sold out to the egoic mind. And that's what we're trying not to do. We have to live the identity of the small self, because that's how we project, that's how we interact with everybody in this life. But we just need to know that that is our projection. It's our avatar in just like in a video game. It's our avatar. It's how we move and relate and connect and do the things that we do in life. But it's not our true self. Our true self stands behind that, above that, below that, however you want to conceive of it. So if you can put it into words, it's too small. How's that? That help?
I think
No,
that's
of course not.
funny. Like, I mean, every time we try to, like, if I try to explain an experience, like if I try to write about it, it never really, it just doesn't really, it's not the same thing as the actual experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this idea, now your life is really not about you. You're part of a much larger dynamic flow called life itself, or simply God. Where he's going with this is this whole idea between the individual and the collective, or the individual and the community. We and the egoic mind sees itself as an individual. Once we eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil as a child, once we cross that threshold into the self-awareness of the adult, the Genesis tells us on that day you will surely die. Well, we do die. We die to the absolute connection that we felt before we had any type of self-awareness or reason, when we didn't even know we were naked. And you can't go back. The way is blocked by the angels with the flaming swords, right? And so from that point on, we're going to experience life very differently. We're going to experience life as if we are separate from and in competition with everyone else. And we will believe that our life is about us as individuals, that the greatest good is what allows us to survive. And we go after that tooth and nail as individuals. But really, the truth of the matter is that we only exist in connection with everything else. That's what Jesus is trying to tell us. Everything is one. Everything, he's one with the Father. The Father is one with us. We are one with him. The true nature of reality is that it's all one thing. What is illusion is all the individual form and function. So our life really isn't about us as individuals. It's about us as part of the flow of everything that is. I think you might remember me talking about the Moken, the sea gypsies, in the Andaman Sea, which is off the coast of Myanmar, or it used to be Thailand, right? And when the tsunami rolled through 20 years ago, they were the only people in the area that didn't lose a single soul, because they could read the sea so well that they were able to go to higher land, or then, or take their boats out deeper into the ocean and avoid the chaos and the carnage. But this is and because they gained this notoriety, then this is only 20 years ago, people really started looking at their culture and realized that they don't have words in their language for anything dealing with property rights. My or mine doesn't exist. When doesn't exist. They didn't have a concept of time. They didn't have a concept of ownership. They saw themselves basically and lived as if they were one organism with many individual moving parts. They operated as a true collective, and everything was everybody's, and so on and so forth. It was fascinating to see this kind of relic from an earlier time in human development. But that's more the idea here, that we are part of this community. We exist as individual parts of a larger organism. And the idea that we're here individually, that even salvation theologically is about us as individuals getting to go to heaven and avoiding hell, is what really is the illusion. That we are saved as a people, we're saved as a collective, and not just our kin and kith, but everybody who ever is. And so this is the larger reality. And I think what this means for us is, as individuals, is that we don't have to perform any individual function in order to be part of the river. We don't have to perform any individual function to be accepted or to be loved or to be saved, because we're already part of that flow. We're in the flow. We just don't see that because we're trapped inside the bubble of our egoic mind. So our life isn't about the individual life that we see and as that egoic projection, that identity that we can name, but we're part of this greater piece that we can call God if we want to. I think that's where he's going with it. The ego projects that individual consciousness. It's kind of like the Matrix movie, right? We're living inside the matrix of our own making, but it's illusion. It's not reality. All right, I threw a lot of words at that. Is that helping at all?
I just go back to like namaste, in yoga, when we say that, it's just like the light in me sees the light in you. And really, it's just, that just comes to mind when I read this.
Mm-hmm. Why is Jesus so big on loving the enemy? Right? Why is he so big on erasing the ethnic and moral and other lines that we draw between us and other people? He's trying to get us to be able to see that there really are no lines of division between us and every other, not just the ones we think we like, right? Not just the ones that resonate with us, but everyone. He's trying to get us to see the truth that will make us free from the bonds of the egoic mind, but also free from our fears, free from our preferences and aversions and all the things that keep us small, to be able to expand out into the oneness that really is kingdom. All right.
Well, I have a question, because when I do the journaling and people ask, who are you, Ellen? So with our egoic self, my answer is, okay, this is my role in society, my family. This is what I do. This is my career. This is my preferences. This is what I like and dislike. So that is our egoic self answering. And then you say, but your true self, there's no words for it. So when they say, okay, you cannot say what you are, well, there's no words to say. This is all of me, and I'm part of society.
Okay, so you don't want to be one of those irritating people when someone asks you a straightforward question and you get all flowery and all weird. Well, I am a part of the flow of life. It's like, no, I just want to know if you're an architect or not. Come on, you know? So we don't have to go all weird on people. It's up to us to know the difference. Yeah, you know, I'm a healthcare worker. I'm a pastor. I'm a HR specialist. I'm a teacher. I'm a counselor, whatever it happens to be. You know, we can talk about our roles, of course, and we can talk about our accomplishments, and we can talk about our attributes as people, because that's what the world is going to see. That's how we're going to relate to each other, and there's nothing wrong with that. Our roles are important to us, right? I'm a parent. I'm a son, a daughter, a sister, a brother, whatever it happens to be. Those are all vitally important to us as human beings. But we need to realize that all of that stuff ends at the headstone. And so what is of ultimate importance and lasting importance is going to be that part of us that we can't name, that we can only experience. But that's for us, you know. We can't talk about it to anybody else, because as soon as we put it into words, you know, if I ask people who they are, sometimes they'll say, well, I'm a child of God. Okay, that's not bad. I don't know what that means to them. You know, I know what it maybe means to me. But at least they're trying to get above their individual roles and accomplishments. But it's for us to be able to have balance. We need to play our roles, right? We need to continue to achieve and accomplish and plan for the future and try to make things better. Of course, that's part of life. But we need to be able to also understand that that's not who we are. That's what we do, so that we can achieve that kind of balance.
Just kind of like our purpose, right? Like how we live our lives is the purpose of our life,
Sure, sure.
but not necessarily like what we are.
But I think this line here, it really becomes important when we start to think theologically, as I was trying to say before. If to us salvation is all about us as an individual getting to go to heaven and avoiding hell, and we see that as separate from everybody else who is going to hell, right? Then we're already at odds with what Jesus is trying to show us. You know, it's not an individual thing, it's a connective thing. You know, our salvation is lived out in connection with each other, not in separation from each other. Remember, separation is sin. Sin is separation. Sin doesn't lead to separation. Sin is the separation itself. As long as we're thinking in terms of separation, we're missing the mark of God's perfect unity. That's why it's called sin. It's missing the mark of that perfect unity. And so to be able to stop thinking dualistically and just see the connection is what we're after here. You know, if we can at least get the concept, then we can start to experience it more, not only in our contemplative sits, but also in our day-to-day moments. More and more, we can just let go of all of the self-chatter, the self-talk and narrative that keeps us separate from each other, and just allow ourselves to be part of the flow. That presence that is the happiness that we talked about yesterday and Sunday, right? We're back to that again.
So it reminds me of this movie I saw at Netflix, and I think Sharon and Kathy, we talked about. It's called Come Sunday, about the inclusion of everybody. That God doesn't pick who goes to hell and who goes to heaven. It's all of us. We are in heaven. It was an interesting story. It's a true story.
So that's what he's referring to at the end, it sounds like, Dave, when he's saying the burden is off of us. We don't have to worry so much because we're really part of this bigger collective. And yeah, the ego is there, but that's not what it's all about.
Absolutely. It's that idea of pay to play, right? It's that idea of performance for acceptance. It's a huge burden when you realize, and Jesus said the same thing, you know, my burden is easy, you know, my burden is light, and you know, I'm forgetting the rest of the quote. But he's trying to tell us the same thing, right? You don't need to be privately correct. We don't need to have the exact theology, the one true theology. We don't have to know exactly how to follow the law and perform exactly right. It's not about that individual correction and perfection that we think that God is requiring of us. That's a burden to try to carry all your life. And it's you're on the hamster wheel and you'll never get off, because you'll never truly know that you've been good enough if you're trying to shoot for your own private perfection. We don't need to be privately correct or perfect. We just need to stay connected. That's it. That's what presence is all about. That's what awareness is all about, is the awareness that we are connected in this moment, and to maintain that as much as we can. Even if it's just 51%, it still has become the character of our lives. But staying connected is everything, because that's what heaven is. It is connection. Kingdom is connection. It's realizing that we're part of the flow, you know, that our boundaries aren't as big as our body, you know, that we expand and we connect with everything that is. That's the real truth that Jesus is trying to show us. Maybe what he says next will help. Faith does not need to push the river, precisely because it's able to trust that there is a river and that we're already in it. Right? So that's more about, we don't need to keep performing to certain specifications. We don't need to push that river. We don't need to try to earn our way into that river. All we need to do is trust that there is one, that there is a flow to all of this, that there's a cohesiveness to it that we can enter into. And not that we can enter into it, we're already in it. We've been in it since the day we were born. We were born in the river, one of those water births, right? And we've been in the river ever since. The analogy I used when I talked about my skydiving episode, right? The analogy was that, you know, we don't even know that we're free falling. We know we're in free fall, because in free fall, once you get up to your terminal velocity, it feels like you're standing still. You don't even know you're falling anymore. You got a wind in your face that's 120 miles an hour, but you don't feel like you're falling. And so here we are, we're all free falling together, and we don't know that we're falling, but we've been falling ever since we were born, since we were pushed out of our mother's fuselage. We've been free falling ever since. And at some point, we're going to hit the ground of our death. But we're already free falling. We're already in the river. And there is no question about trying to get back in the plane, or do we jump? We've already jumped. We're free falling. Nobody asked us if we wanted to jump. We were just born. And we've been free falling ever since. So we're in the river. We're in the flow. All we have to do is recognize that. We got to get enough of the stuff out of the way so that we can see that we're in the flow, and then choose accordingly. So we don't have to push the river. All we have to do is trust that it's there. And the river is God's infinite love. Without some awareness of being supported by and part of this always flowing river, you will succumb to your ego's preoccupations and fears. Without awareness of the river, without awareness of the flow of all this, then what do we automatically do? We succumb. We become just completely bounded by that self-narrative, what the egoic mind is telling us. That becomes our only reality. If we're not aware that there's anything else, then that is the entirety of our lives, the entirety of the world for us. Jesus is trying to break us out from that. Jesus is so psychological. I mean, his way is so psychological. 2,000 years before anyone had an idea what that was all about. But he's speaking about the reality of the human condition and the reality of our spiritual formation and what it's all about. That transcendent awareness is what's going to break us free from our small selves. Break us out of the illusion. To be held by God means that you have to let go of your small boundaries, at least to some degree. He says, frankly, this is a really nice image. Frankly, you have to be able to be shared. You have to be able to be shared. To sit at the group table instead of sitting alone and apart. The ego initially does not like that, even though it will be the source of its deepest happiness and contentment. This brought me right back to Matthew 22. And it's a story where the Sadducees come up to Jesus and they try to trap him and ridicule him for his beliefs. Now, there is a difference between the Sadducees and the Pharisees in Jesus' day. The Sadducees only accepted the first 5 books, the Torah of the Bible, all right? Now, in the first 5 books, there is no mention of an afterlife. There is no mention of the resurrection of the dead. There's no mention of any kind of angelology or demonology or any of this celestial realm that we take so for granted in our Christian theology, and that appears later in later books of the Bible. But since the Sadducees only accepted the first 5, they didn't accept that there was necessarily an afterlife at all. And they certainly didn't accept that there was a resurrection of the dead, that they were going to be resurrected, brought back to life in order to be with God at the end of all things. The Pharisees did believe that, but the Sadducees did not. There was an evolution in Jewish thought, and especially after the exile, when the Jews that returned from Babylon, from Persia, they brought with them a very well-developed angelology and demonology and some other ideas that they incorporated into their belief system. And the Pharisees were part of that tradition, and Jesus was part of that tradition as well. He believed that. Now, because I say that there was no mention of these things in the first 5 books, that doesn't mean they don't exist. It just means they weren't mentioned. But the Sadducees were taking this very literally. If it wasn't there, it didn't exist, right? And so they come to Jesus knowing that he believes in a resurrection, and they want to ridicule him. And so there is the Levitical law that if a man and a woman were married, and the man died and the woman was still childless at the time of her husband's death, then the husband's brother needed to take her as his wife, because she would have no support. If she didn't have a husband and she didn't have a child, then she was really cast adrift. And so he would take her as his wife so that she could bear children and be part of a family once again. And so they posit this idea where a woman is married to a man, he dies, she's childless, and so her brother marries her, he dies, and then every one of 7 brothers marries her in turn, as according to the Levitical law, but they all die, and she's left. So the question to Jesus is, when she dies in the Olam Haba, in the world to come, whose wife will she be? She's been married to all 7 brothers. And of course, they're trying to just mock him. They're just trying to mock the whole thing. But Jesus' answer is fascinating. And it's one little insight, one little glimpse of the afterlife that is really not happening in Scripture otherwise. And he says, you guys just don't understand. He said, in the resurrection, in the Olam Haba, the next life, men and women will not be given in marriage, but will be like the angels in heaven. Think about what he's saying there, you know. And I know we've talked about this before, but just to bring it into this context, he's basically saying that we're not going to be paired off in the next life. You know, we're not going to have husbands and wives. We're not going to have best friends. We're not going to have an inner circle. Those are things that we need now here in this life, inside our individual bodies, inside our individual egoic minds. You know, we have those kinds of primary connection points. But in the next life, we won't have those. And the implication, of course, is that everyone will be our best friend. Everyone will be as close as a husband or wife. We're all going to be connected. I mean, this is starting to approach the Buddhist idea of the consciousness, the drop of our consciousness returning to the ocean, you know. And the egoic mind does not like that. I don't like it. Do you like it? Doesn't sound cool to me, you know. The biggest question I have about the afterlife, that probably most of us do, is not so much whether we continue, but how do we continue? Will we be known as we are known? You know, will we still have that much individuality, or are we somehow merged? But he says, frankly, you have to be able to be shared. to sit at the group table instead of sitting alone and apart. And the ego initially does not like that, even though it will be the source of its deepest happiness and content. I was hoping that that Brady would be here for this discussion, but Patricia's here, and they both had these near-death experiences. And I know Brady talked about the fact that there was no visuals at all for him. It was complete blackness, but there was no fear in the blackness. There was just that sense of being held. When somebody asked him, and this is really fascinating, were you thinking about your wife? And he said, truthfully, not at all. I wasn't thinking about my wife. I wasn't thinking about any of the earthly attachments that are so important to me. He was just part of that flow. He was part of that connection. But the moment that he agreed to go back, then everything flooded back to him again. But in that space, he didn't have that sense. How about you, Patricia? Are you there?
Yes,
Is that a question that makes sense to you?
yes, I didn't know if I was muted or not.
You're there.
What came to me was the soul or the consciousness, words are limiting, that existed before I had a form or a body, and what exists after I have a body is who I am.
Okay. And in that moment when you were in between, on the other side, as you like to say, were you aware of thinking about your earthly attachments? Were they still important to you, or how would you characterize that?
Brady's the only other one I've talked to that it was darkness, and that's how it was for me too. But it wasn't a bad darkness. It was more, I'd explain the darkness more like a holding place. I did have an attachment because I was concerned about my daughter and granddaughter because they were living with me and how they would survive. So, you know, but that was not who I was at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I'm not making any sense.
Oh, you are.
So I apologize. I didn't have a forgetting of my experiences here. I had a remembrance of them, but that part wasn't important. That part I would coin as the ego or myself, you know, my little self concept, not who I really am.
All right, we're really getting out there right now, and I understand that. And this is pretty far out stuff. And I don't want to get lost in this kind of speculation either. But I think it is important for us to recognize that as long as we continue to completely identify with our small self, as long as we continue to see life as being all about us as an individual, and our spiritual formation to be about us as an individual, I think we're missing the thrust of Jesus' teaching and his way, because what he's trying to do is to get us to expand beyond those boundaries, to be able to see the truth beyond them, and to see our connectedness with everyone. Here in this life, I truly believe we can have the best of all worlds. We can have our individual form and function, and we can still at the same time see the connectedness with everyone. How is it going to be in the next life? I have no idea. You know, there are so few clues, and even those are shrouded in metaphor. So how can we really know? The truth is we can't know. But what we can do is trust the river. We can trust that no matter how it is, it's going to be better than anything we could imagine. And even if a discussion like this feels like it's going to be less than what we have now, when we're there, just like Patricia says, and like Brady has said, and everyone else pretty much who's had an NDE, it's just this feeling of complete connection and rest. So we don't need to fear it. We don't need to worry about it, but we can start practicing it now. And I think that's the most important thing. We don't have to wait for death to be able to start to experience what heaven and kingdom really are, which is that interconnectedness now.
Dave, one thought I popped into my head that I thought might be connected here is I've heard it explained that we first learn to recognize that I'm not my thoughts, right? So we separate our thoughts from our awareness, right? And identify those as two separate things. But at some point, we need to collapse them back together, in that my awareness and my thoughts are one and the same, essentially. And even though I am this individual consciousness, it's collapsed back in with the universal consciousness, if you will, as part of that river flow.
That's pretty cool. I like that. Yeah. I mean, you know, there's so many different ways that we can try to express this, right? You know, we're never going to be able to rationally get a handle on it. But if what William just said, if that's helpful to you in being able to bring all this together, because it sounds to me like what he's talking about is a balance between the two. And it's always a balance between the two. If we start saying it's this or it's that, we're back to duality, right? We're back to the dualism of thought. What we want to do is get unitive and bring it all together. So to recognize that we are not our thoughts, but that they also blend in to the totality of our consciousness, hey, that's not bad.
Yeah. And I find that thought a little relieving, right? Like it like the last paragraph here about taking that burden off, which is, it's all here, everything belongs, and all we have to do is be present to whatever that is.
The yoke is easy and the burden is light. We make it so heavy. We make it so hard, you know, because we think we have to pay to play. And that's the exact opposite of the good news and the exact opposite of grace, you know. And Paul comes hard down on that. And we need to just realize, you know, if we're trying to push the river, we're expending way too much energy and we're never going to get where we're trying to go. We need to flow with the river. That's a very different experience.
So if the egos comes into play, then you're going to have people that are trying to paddle faster than somebody else, right? Competition.
Exactly. But Jesus says, no matter who wins the race, you know, and when you arrive,
We're all the
you all
same.
get paid the same.
You all get the gold medal, right?
It doesn't matter. It's just that you
Get
do
a
arrive.
participation medal.
You all get the gold medal.
All right. All right. I think we're done kicking this particular
Yeah,
one.
one more thing, maybe for next week then, but just to put the seed here, you know, the one I've been questioning for the last few minutes is the sentence that says, frankly, you have to be able to be shared to sit at the group table instead of sitting alone and apart. So I said, yeah, because now that I'm more, you know, more mature and more at peace with myself, I can say, here I am. Here's the group table. I'm sharing myself. You know, I don't choose to sit alone now and apart. So that's, you know, the boundary is more open. And yet there are certain instances where here I am, and you say, I'm here at the group table, but then the group shuns you, right? Then you are set apart by the other person. You cannot control whether you go to another group or
I think you're moving into a different sort of understanding of that particular metaphor or the analogy. It's not about the group shunning you. This willingness to be shared is a willingness to let go of the boundaries that keep you separate. And that comes at a huge cost. We've talked about the ego is not going to go quietly into the night. It's the hardest thing you will ever do is to step outside of the ego because it's hanging on for dear life. It's trying to survive. It's not going to let you tear down those walls or see beyond them without a fight. That is the hard work that we do, not to accomplish or acquire something, but to let go of what's blocking us from the truth that makes us free. To be willing to be shared is to step outside of those boundaries and see the connection points. We're never going to be shunned. We're never going to be not accepted by God. That's an impossibility given who God is. And so we don't need to worry about that. What we need to do is to break through the fear that we have of becoming undefended. That's the huge fear. And that takes basically a lifetime. It's not going to happen all at once, but we keep at it. All we're trying to do is get to 51% though. As soon as we're there, we've changed the character and the nature of our lives, and then we can keep growing from there. But now we become a people who can be present in any given moment and make choices that love would require, and not just for the individual survival or advantage that we were primarily motivated by before.
I
Hopefully
liked
that helps.
a comment Randy had a couple of weeks ago about this idea that my ego is taking offense to your ego, and your ego is taking offense to mine. And you know, it just seemed like a really good handle to kind of really think about. It's only my ego that gets offended, right? It's only my ego that
Yeah.
offends.
And it's the
There's a
same for everyone
reason.
else. So,
There's a
yeah.
reason we keep Randy around. I just want to
It's nice to be invited to the party, even though I got bad breath.
His ego
But yeah,
wants
so
to
that's the thing, is where I don't take offense as much as I used to, is I understand that you've got self-concepts and you've got concepts about me. You've got all kinds of thinking going on. Okay, just like I do. It's the thinking that causes the separation. But behind all the thoughts, before those thoughts, after those thoughts and such, we're compadres. We're really actually allies, not enemies. But again, it's just a given. There's going to be the darn enemies because humans think. I think therefore I am. So yeah, some people find me offensive, and that's okay, because again, it's just a given. And again, if we're going to use the gold standard for humanness, Jesus, obviously that guy had some people that weren't real fond of him, you know. It's just, again, it's just part of the human game and stuff. And in closing, this realization that it's all concept, you know, God is a man-made concept. Okay, anything that I'm trying to, again, as Dave said so well, is that anytime I try to put words and meanings to of course behind all this stuff, you know, again, I'm just making up. You know, okay, Jesus is God, God is Jesus. I got all kinds of ideas for it. Doesn't mean that it's correct. At best, it's incomplete. Everything is a man-made concept. My reality is a bunch of freaking concepts, and so is yours. And when I realize that, I don't take my thinking so seriously. I don't think you're thinking. It's like, okay, cool. Well, I appreciate you sharing and stuff, and I respect it and appreciate it, but I don't think of it as an absolute truth. Yeah, at best, your understanding of me is incomplete. The best my understanding of myself is incomplete. But there's a whole lot of incorrect as well in there.
All right, we're going to give Randy the last word in all of that, because
Thank you.
Except for Scott.
Yes.
I'm so happy to spend time with you guys. Thanks for letting me share this time. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for this exploration of who we are and what we're about and what the proverbial meaning of life is. All the concepts and ideas that flow around and share with each other and invite each other to explore. And you're so patient with us and loving and kind. And just creation itself testifies to how beautifully you create everything. It's quite amazing. We can't wrap our minds around it. Just about the time we think we got it under control, it opens up another billion miles of space we haven't explored yet. And it keeps going and going and going. So like that, Lord, we keep going and going and going on the never-ending journey, searching for our meaning and searching for our connection. Help us, Lord, with our connections, to honor the connection, to see them as important, see them as something we should nurture and take care of, and just honor, is the best word I can come up with. Lord, we want to thank you for this time together. So Jesus, it's in your name and your mighty, mighty power and glory. We give our thanks and we say our amens. Amen. Lord Jesus. Amen.
All right. Thanks for staying late, everybody. Great conversation. We'll see you Sunday. Except for
Bye,
Gail
guys.
and Bill, not you yet.
Bye, Gail and Bill.
Bye.
Have
Bye,
a good
guys.
trip.
Guys.
Good night. Bye,
Good night,
Jordana.
good night, good night, good night.
Good night, good night, good night.
Good
We're
night,
out of here.
Jordana. Good night, Scotty.
See you guys on
Good night,
Sunday.
Mrs. Kalish Bash, whoever you are.
All right.
You
Bye-bye.
remember,
Sunday.